Hello, welcome again to another Atypling Philosopher video. I say again because I assume most of you have been here before, but if you haven't, welcome to your first Atypling Philosopher video. And welcome to my esteemed guest, Dr. Aaron Adair. Aaron, how are you?
I am doing well, but this is the first time I've been told I'm esteemed. That seems incorrect.
You're esteemed by me, and that's all that matters, or at least it's all that matters to me.
The only thing I'm usually steamed is vegetables.
Esteemed. I esteem you. Yes. Dr. Adair, talk us through a brief intro to yourself for those who don't know you, but also throw in a little bit of your experience with searching for aliens, if you don't mind.
All right. Yeah. Since our topic is going to be focused on extraterrestrial intelligence and trying to find them or talk to them. So my primary background is physics. I earned my PhD in physics. So in theory, I know a thing about the laws of physics, and I usually wanted to be focused on things like astronomy, the cosmos, the structure of everything. Right now, I currently work as a data scientist, and I also have a research associateship with MIT, so I can continue some of my research there. And among the fun things I did back when I was a student, I had an internship at the SETI Institute. SETI stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. So I at least had some time of professionally using the radio telescopes that SETI has control of. And while those telescopes were scanning and recording the night sky, we had banks of computers looking at the feed of that data for any possible sign that there was an intelligence in those signals. So I have actually tried finding ET. I haven't succeeded yet, but I have had some experience looking.
That's brilliant. So you're not just a random guest. You are, in fact, perfectly selected for your expertise in this area. That's fantastic. What was your, did you ever think you'd found anything exciting or,
Well, I'll say this much. Considering when I was there, SETI had already been around for decades. So the chances of me picking up the signal for the couple of nights I was personally there at the telescopes was pretty low. But there's always the hope. And the fact of the matter is, I learned more and more about how they even do the search, how they actually try to do it in any sort of scientifically justifiable manner. And I've also learned probably something maybe just important is not even so much picking up a signal from ET, but actually the lack of picking up a signal also actually provides us some information. It puts limits on the existence of other civilizations, and with other astrophysical knowledge, it might also tell us something about the fate of humanity. Basically, if we turn our radio telescopes out there and we detect nothing, but our physics tells us there should be thousands of civilizations, the conclusion you would have is, oh, civilizations must have a short lifespan. We're in trouble. So even finding nothing is actually strangely informative.
Yeah. So and Souza says he was an Episcopalian. I just want to bring up an alien gag there.
Thank you, Sohan. Thank you.
Integration, lovely. So we're going to be talking about ETI, which is extraterrestrial intelligence. That's what that acronym stands for. If I say aliens tonight, just assume that I mean ETI. An intelligence form of life, which would be sentient intelligence. The sort which we imagine ourselves to have to different degrees. And we'll be talking about UFOs briefly, but actually UAPs is a better description or a better term that is now used. UAPs is unidentified aerial phenomena rather than unidentified flying objects, because they aren't necessarily objects. They could be phenomena of light, like interacting in different whatever. So if we don't know what they are, it's not necessarily an object. But talk to us a little bit about why there is so much renewed interest in UFOs and aliens at the moment, because it's all over the news, particularly in America. It's been featured on CNN and all the mainstream media channels. Why is that? Why is Machiu Kaku, the futurist and theoretical physicist, popping up on news talking about aliens?
Yeah, why Professor Kaku in particular is so deep into it, that I don't have a good answer for, but I would say it's in part a phenomenon that's an outgrowth in part from the success of shows like Ancient Aliens on the History Channel. And for those who don't know the History Channel, their old tagline was "Where the past comes to life." But when you watch it today, you watch and you realize the new tagline is "Where the past comes to die," because it's nothing but bad science fiction and ice road truckers nowadays.
Yeah.
But that's just my completely correct opinion. So
you take quite a skeptical view then. I mean, you by the sounds of it.
At the very least, the way that Ancient Aliens, the show, operates is that they don't have any actual evidence to work with. And the things they do use is actually they're basically recycling Victorian racism that was originally there to promote views of like there being an Atlantis-like civilization in Earth's past, or later the ideas from like Theosophy, where basically you have what we now call extra-dimensional aliens, but basically for them were spiritual forces to then explain the wonders of the world. So a lot of it is basically recycled. Hey, those primitive people, primitive, read non-white people, couldn't have done this, that, or the other thing. They couldn't have figured this out. Therefore, aliens. That is usually so much of what that argumentation is. And then if you want actual good hard evidence, well, if you were looking for evidence of photos of aliens from the 50s of their aircraft, their things like that, they're either hoaxes or blurry pictures. Today, in like the talks in front of Congress, the best examples they have of alien aircraft are blurry pictures.
Yeah, so I mean, what happened in June last year? There's a big report that came out that there are 144, different phenomena, and 143 of them are still unexplained. And so, you had Barack Obama saying, "Oh, this is interesting," type thing. And these reports are serious reports about unidentified aerial phenomena that are still unaccounted for. And this is piquing a lot of people's interests, given that I've got a really good friend who is absolutely obsessed with this kind of stuff. Like who's not, he's of a religious background, but he's like really genuinely watching a bunch of documentaries that are now coming out at the moment. Just is really into this, saying like when you've got expert attestation of fighter pilots saying X, Y, and Z, and they are genuinely saying that something is going on here that cannot be explained by our known sort of data, there must be something. What would you say to that?
The thing is, though, that like these sorts of arguments from the authority of these eyewitness reports usually are not all that strong, that it's basically saying, well, there's no way this person could have made this sort of mistake, when in reality, these are the sorts of mistakes that are actually the easiest to make. For example, how fast can such a UAP be going? Well, to know how fast it's going, you need more than just how, what angular distance it covers in front of you. You need to know how big it is, how far away it is. And if those are all things you don't know, then you actually don't have any accurate way to estimate how fast it's zipping across. And some of the video that has been shown out there, like trying to show like, oh, there's this artifact that seems to be moving super fast. Those who are much better than me at analyzing the video and the telemetry information from there, able to reconstruct and say, oh, this appears to actually be a Mylar balloon going about 20 meters per second, not an alien aircraft going, twice the speed of sound and doing 12G turns.
But one of the things they mentioned are the unnatural kind of routes that these supposed craft are taking, doing right angles and stuff. And, again, what would you say to that kind of as a skeptic?
For me, it's always going to have to be a case-by-case basis to try to figure out what might be going on there. But very, very often, the reason something is hard to explain is that there is a lack of data to actually tell one way or the other. That's why, in some ways, still the best data for alien aircraft isn't super sharp images, but still blurry ones where we can't quite tell what's going on. Yeah. The fact that it's always at that, not subliminal, but like at the edge of our viewing, at the edge of our sensors, makes it so like we're filling in the gaps. In the same way, it's kind of like the searches for Sasquatch or Bigfoot. After, decades and decades of looking, every single image of Sasquatch has been a blur squatch.
But okay, fair enough. So you personally are skeptical of these phenomena, and
I should actually also point out that, like I say, when I mentioned people more expert than me in analyzing this, in particular here on YouTube and in the skeptic community, Mick West has probably done the most in doing these sorts of analyses and coming up with more plausible explanations of the video feed and things like that. So please don't rest on my authority. The analysis from Mick West in particular, I have found to be insightful and probably the best place to go to for more down-to-earth explanations.
So what I mean, personally, I would say it's almost certain that life exists in the universe outside of Earth, right? And it's almost certain that intelligent life exists in the universe outside of Earth. But I would say we're quarantined by distance. What would you understand by that? I mean, can you talk to us a little bit about that?
If we're quarantined, it's going to depend ultimately on how common civilizations are in the galaxy or in the universe more broadly. So yeah, like, is there intelligence somewhere in the universe? In some ways, it's going to depend on what criteria we use. So if we say not just the observable universe, but even like beyond the cosmic horizon, which could go on infinitely, the probability of there being intelligent life in that universe is almost 100%. If we want to be more limited to life that we could detect in our galaxy, then like there are still, near 500 billion stars where we can imagine life emerging and civilizations forming. The analyses that I've read on it would suggest it might really be the case that we might be the only civilization in the Milky Way galaxy. But I do notice that the reason they also will come to those conclusions is that there's these gigantic uncertainties on the various numbers that will go into the famous Drake equation. For background, the Drake equation was created by Frank Drake, who's actually, I think, still alive and at the SETI Institute. I've met him once or twice. But basically taking the various numbers of like the rate of star formation, the fraction of stars that have planets, the fraction of planets that are actually habitable, that fraction that actually produces life, that fraction that produces intelligent life, and so on, as well as the length that a given detectable civilization is around. Those are the factors that go in. And for a lot of those, we have really no good way of knowing. So we have to have gargantuan ranges of what those probabilities might be. And that kind of like squashes like having any certainty that there is another civilization in our Milky Way. But that uncertainty can also be undone by one great observation that could really reduce it. So in particular, I'm imagining 30 years from now, NASA finally sends a probe to Europa, drills down into the ice of Europa to get down to the oceans of water that we know are there. There's actually more water on Europa than there is on Earth. So if we drill down and put a camera there and we look down and then something comes and licks the camera lens, all of our estimates are going to change dramatically. One observation like that would fundamentally change the probability of life in the universe, because if it emerges multiple times in one solar system, and it can do it in a place that doesn't even require a sun, because the reason Europa has an ocean underneath it isn't because of the sun, but because of the elliptical orbit that it has around Jupiter, that tidal gravitational force is basically squeezing the moon and heating up its core. If that can produce life, then our notions of what makes something habitable or required for habitation balloons dramatically. So we would go from, we can't be sure if life exists or intelligent life exists elsewhere in the galaxy, to there must be. One observation could do that. So
my theories is that, and we'll talk about exactly why, but I think life in the universe is plentiful. There's absolutely no doubt about that, and intelligent life will be along with that. But as I said, it's quarantined by distance, which means to say that to get to a habitable planet or some other kind of intelligent life and discover it and come across it, we would have to traverse such extraordinary distances in terms of the scale of the universe that you would need to be able to harness the speed of light in order to do that. And that is where we start coming to problems. So the idea that aliens are genuinely popping by and checking out our planet and hanging out with us is unlikely, given that they would have to harness the speed of light in their technology to do so. And then you start wondering, well, if they can go across like these astronomical distances to visit humanity, why are they going to bother like sticking a probe up our asses? Coming all that way to go, do you know what I want to find out? I want to find out what's up this cow's bum. Or it's like, really? really, or like I really want to know what's going on with this drunk guy's mind, so I'm going to pick him up after he's been down a pub. And then...
Well, I would point that the sacred texts of science fiction show that actually the aliens will want to come and talk to the whales. Star Trek 4, The Journey Home, where an alien civilization comes in and they're trying to talk to humpback whales that went extinct in the 21st century. So Kirk and company have to go back in time to bring humpback whales to the future so they can communicate with the aliens that are otherwise like destroying the Federation. Like I said, sacred documents of science fiction.
Yeah, of course. I do profess my ignorance. I'm a bad man. So I would say, yes, there's life out there, but it's quarantined by distance. But let's assume then, for the sake of argument, that alien life, intelligent extraterrestrial life exists, right? And it exists plentifully. And the reasons we're going to suggest that is due to the scale of the universe. And there are three principles. The principle of nature's uniformity. So the idea that, our laws that work here are going to work all over the universe. And if you've got a massive universe, and evolution or abiogenesis can work here, which is like the creation of or the development of life, the starting of life can take place here, then if these laws are uniform everywhere else in the universe, and there are gazillions of opportunities for this to happen, it will happen. And the principle of plenitude, which is everything that is possible will be realized because of the sheer scale of the universe and the amount of the frequency of everything happening. Like, it's just stuff will happen. And then the principle of mediocrity, which is there's nothing special about Earth, right? We're just our status or position. We're a pale blue dot in the middle of like nowhere. Kind of just, there's nothing special about us. So therefore, those three principles together will suggest that life is out there to a vast degree. Would you agree with that?
The only question ultimately to me is just the scale. Is it the case that, I am pretty sure that on the grandest of scales, there definitely are other advanced civilizations, whether more advanced than us or not, I can't say, but if they exist out there, I would look at the tech tree and there's a lot of ways up. So if there are other civilizations, they're probably more advanced than us.
Yeah. And this is
question. Yeah.
So I was just going to say,
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say my mate, who I just mentioned earlier, he's probably only just popped on. I said he really loves, like, this talk about sort of alien life and craft that can do X, Y, and Z. He says, therefore, not quarantined, as third order civilizations just 10,000 years in advance of us could manipulate whole galaxies. In other words, like, they could have such, and there is no reason to say they wouldn't necessarily be able to harness things that we, Arthur C. Clarke's third law, which is, people that appear to have the people that have technology so far in advance of yours will appear to you like they're harnessing magic, Exactly, so the Spanish conquistadors that go and attack the Aztecs are like, oh my god, they've got guns that fire, these things that shoot fire and then we die. That's magic. No, it's technology that's just a little bit advanced to yours. Now, if, as Rob says, there are civilizations that are like 10,000 years or maybe even like 200,000, 500,000 years more advanced than ours, having started earlier than us, maybe with a planet that started life much earlier than ours or in a particular way, then there's no reason to think necessarily that they wouldn't be able to harness these technologies that could get them from A to B.
Yes. Yeah. Ultimately, it's going to be a question, I think, of the motivation of those civilizations, and are there, engineering or physical limits that just make it too impractical to visit, the rest of the galaxy. And also, just a quick note, when Rob had mentioned third order civilizations, just for everyone there, I believe he's using the Kardashev scale, which was invented to try to describe civilizations. A type 1 or first order civilization is one that can use all the energy to whatever purpose is needed of an entire planet. Type 2 can use all the energy of a solar system. Type 3 is then the entire galaxy. Type 4 are multiple galaxies. Earth would probably be something like a 0.775 civilization. We can manipulate most of the energy of our planet. But type 3 would just be so phenomenally beyond what we can do, because they can manipulate so much energy that, we would barely even recognize them.
There's shed loads, literally billions of instances of intelligent life out there. Let's assume that for the basis of what we're now going to go go to talk about. So if we came across, and let's forget all like, is it technologically possible? If we came across intelligent alien life as a kind of secular bunch of people, you and I, Aaron, as atheists, what would our considerations be? Would it like blow our minds in a way that we have to reassess literally everything, or is it kind of what we would predict?
To me, it seems like, considering the best we can tell, the reason that we humans exist is through natural processes. And if it's the same general natural processes happening throughout the universe, finding that the same general occurrence has taken place on another star system, or in another star system, as I should say, that seems not just plausible, but should even be expected. Now, will they come out and look just like humans? Maybe not. Maybe when we finally meet the aliens, they're going to look like oversized crab people. We don't know. I'm kind of hoping for the super intelligent octopuses from another planet, and we can call them the calamarians.
I mean, hope springs eternal. And if you like calamari, there could be some serious battles on our hands. As far as I'm concerned, atheists would be like, okay, we will deal with this pragmatically and practically and politically. This is like discovering another tribe on Earth. Just, instead of being here, it's there. How we deal with it broadly be the same. There will be practical implications. There'll be sort of power, talk about power and resources and all that kind of stuff. But it's nothing greatly challenging to our worldview. Okay.
Yeah.
But
in
now
fact, it probably should give us hope, because if we discover there's other civilizations out there, then that would probably indicate to us that there's also a good chance that our civilization is not going to die off soon. If we see other examples of other long-lived civilizations, and again, the principle of mediocrity would tell us we're probably not an exception. So if they can make it, we can make it. So finding aliens should actually also give us hope of us as a civilization, that we have a fighting chance to be here in another 100 or 1,000 years.
That's a really, really good point. Never thought of that. So now let's talk about religious people. And before we talk about the effect of intelligent alien life on religious people's worldviews, let's talk a little bit about cognitive dissonance. So cognitive dissonance is, for those who are uninitiated, a hugely important sort of mental mechanism that takes place. So, well, cognitive dissonance is the disharmony you have when you hold a core view and then you are presented with evidence against that core view, and your brain has a disharmony. So, for example, say you're a creationist, you think the world's 6,000 years old, you're presented with evidence that we've got a fossil record and, and it's millions of years old, right? And then, so it's like evidence against my core position. What do I do? This disharmony is really, really uncomfortable. So we need to do something. Our brain does something. Now, quite often it'll be an attempt to retain the core view, your core belief. So your important belief. So it's like 6,000 years old, God, I believe that's my, the earth is 6,000 years old and I believe in God. That has to remain. So what do I do with this evidence? So I can reject it. I can just say several different things. I can disbelieve it, like you're wrong, or, your sources are incorrect or disreputable, or Satan planted the fossils there, or whatever that allows this evidence to be rejected or to be integrated in some way with your existing worldview. So that's broadly what happens. Now, why I mention cognitive dissonance is kind of foreshadowing what we're going to talk about with regard to how religious people deal with finding alien life. But it's interesting to know how the theory of cognitive dissonance came about, with regard to Leon Festinger. I mean, do you know about Leon Festinger and how he developed the theory?
Yeah, that he was basically, either him personally or one of his grad students was basically infiltrating into a UFO cult in the 1950s. And they were expecting their own sort of rapture event to be taken away, or the aliens were going to come and, bring upon some sort of apocalyptic end to the world. And when the date came and passed, not only did the cult survive, but those who remained became even more fervent in the beliefs of that religion. So that was the starting point to the idea of cognitive dissonance. In fact, I think that's the name of the book itself. I forget.
So yeah, and of course, this is actually it's called cognitive dissonance reduction. So it's how do you reduce the cognitive dissonance? But these days, most people just call it cognitive dissonance. But it's actually how do you reduce the dissonance? So what happened is they were supposed to be zapped up by this alien race, and they weren't zapped up. So they're like, rather than say, right, we were wrong, this whole worldview is bonkers, we got it wrong. They actually, rejigged the date, said, oh, we got the date wrong, we just did a bit of interpretation wrong or whatever. And they as you say, they remained believing, and even more fervently so. So a couple of them, I think, sort of went by the wayside, but broadly speaking, most of the cult continue to believe, but with a greater fervency. So that's really interesting. Core beliefs hold on tenuously. So when we're going to talk about, how will religious people deal with discovering alien life, you can bet your bottom dollar that they will not shed their belief, that they will somehow integrate this new knowledge, despite the problems we're going to talk about, with the core belief that God exists. And in fact, that Jesus, if we're going to talk about Christianity, that Jesus and the whole sort of Bible is still relevant, prevalent, so on and so forth. The other thing to bear in mind is that, let's assume an omni-God, where God is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, and is the ultimate creator of everything and has full ultimate sovereignty over the design and creation of the universe. We're going to assume that kind of God. That's the most common understanding of God, the God of classical theism. If you believe in a different God, then okay, fair enough. But we have to concentrate on pick one, and that's the one. So the first thing to think about, well, there was a paper that I think you've got in your hands there, which is called Houston, Do We Have a Problem?
Yes.
By
Extraterrestrial Intelligent Life and Christian Belief by McIntosh and McNabb.
Yeah, McIntosh and McNabb. An interesting paper, even though it's written by theists and I disagree with parts and whatnot, it's worth a read. Like it's just, maybe it's because I'm not used to this subject and it's just an exciting new subject. But I actually got quite a bit out of reading that paper. And they split the problems into 6 different areas, or potential problems, because they eventually say there is no problem. Right, but they say the problems are split into 6 areas: doctrine, scripture, narrative, the problem of evil, and what the other 2 are: theism,
and narrative.
Yeah,
theism, what they call narrative.
Theism, scripture, doctrine, tradition, the problem of evil, and narrative. So those are 6 areas of potential conflicts. Now, I've got a theologian friend called Peter S. Williams. I've debated him in at Southampton University. It's on YouTube. It's on my YouTube channel, actually. You can check out the debate. We debated morality. But I emailed him to say, because I'm writing a feature article for Only Sky on this very topic, and I wanted to get his views, get a few quotes from him. And one of the things he said was, no, and this is in private correspondence, no doubt the discovery of aliens, if it ever happened, would impact different religions and different members of each religion in different ways. Yep, agreed. Of course, as a theist, I believe that whether or not aliens exist is ultimately up to God. Yeah. Moreover, in light of what we know about abiogenesis, so the creation, the beginning of life, it seems to me that the discovery of genuinely alien life would be additional strong evidence favoring intelligent design theory and/or various ways of framing the design argument. So he says, well, if we find intelligent life out there, actually this plays into a theistic belief in God, because it's more evidence of design and creation of intelligent life.
Well, and when it comes to that intelligent design one, when it comes to setting up the universe the right way for life, there's a bit of confusion that can happen there, because some will argue that intelligent life in the universe is highly improbable and nearly impossible without divine intervention, because it takes all these other conditions about like the sun, the planet, the other planets in the solar system that have to be all just right. So if there are other life forms out there, that kind of argument, that kind of intelligent design argument has to go by the wayside. Now, conversely, it sounds like he'd probably be going more with the idea of, the constants of nature are set up so that way the universe itself is conducive to generating life. And so finding life being generated on other planets is then expected. That would make sense. Though conversely, if the universe is designed for life, it has the other problem that the vast majority of the space universe is instantly fatal to life.
Yeah.
Which is not what you'd expect if it's supposed to be accommodating to life, if it can only barely exist on the surface of a planet. And if you just go a few feet above or below, the conditions become uninhabitable for us. And of course, if you go 100 kilometers up, instantly lethal. If you go to the vast majority of any place in the universe, it is instantly lethal. Not just, you can't stay for a while. I mean, you will die before you even notice.
So yeah, this is like the fine-tuning argument to me is such a bad argument. I mean, I have such fundamental problems with it as a theistic argument, saying this universe is fine-tuned for life. The constants are just right, Goldilocks, and therefore it's like if you were to sit down and design something. So I wrote an article on Only Sky the other day talking about rabbit hutches, saying that if I said to you, invited you into my house and said, "Oh, come out the back and see my rabbit hutch I built for my 3 rabbits," right? Without knowing anything else, and you know how much I love rabbits, right? I love rabbits. I am love when it comes to rabbits. You'd think, right, this rabbit hutch is going to be really appropriate for the number of rabbits, and it'll be really comfortable for them, and then blah, blah, blah. So I bring you out the back of my house, and like you've got that prediction in your mind. And then what do you actually see? I say, well, look, I built this rabbit hutch and it stretches to the moon. It's so vast, you can't even see the sides of the rabbit hutch. And I say, look, here are my 3 rabbits, and they've got this whole rabbit hutch. But by the way, there's a vortex up there that if they get sucked into, they'll die. And over there, there's it's pumping out hot boiling oil, and when it pumps out hot boiling oil, it rents a gap in the earth, and the rabbits could fall down there. And if they eat those mushrooms over there, they get poisoned and die. Like all this evidence I'm giving you is like evidence against this notion that that I'm a good designer and that I love rabbits, right? Yeah. So the idea that the universe appears actually better designed for death than life, and the vast scale of it is not what you would expect if the universe was designed for humanity or for intelligent life. Would you agree broadly with that?
I would. I think that's a pretty strong analogy. It also reminds me of another point that, like, if we're, saying that the universe is built to some special end, that the constants need to be such a way so that life can exist, why can't that further extend and say, actually, the purpose of the universe isn't life, it's for the production of iPhones? Because to have iPhones, what you need then are extremely intelligent species to develop enough culture, enough science, enough technology so they can begin the mass production of these devices. So if it seems like the constants of nature are just as good at explaining iPhone production as it is life. And at the very least, if I take this phone into the vacuum of space, it doesn't instantly die.
That's a really good argument. And so what you can do is present loads of arguments to show how problematic the fine-tuning argument is. And it's just like, like why would you have to create constants that are so have to fit together, like, that any kind of movement there would not produce life, but also just is so perfect for as I say, for producing mostly not life. It produces mostly not life, and it's far easier to die than it is to live.
And again, of course, on top of that, with just general omnitheism, the idea that if you believe that there's this other realm where these constraints don't exist at all, called heaven, then you have another question. Well, why does this realm even exist? And it has to be specially tuned for life, when clearly God had other options and apparently enacts that other option. In fact, it's been argued on statistical grounds, from Bayesian grounds, that basically a universe that's fine-tuned is actually more expected on naturalism than theism. Why? Because we could exist here in this universe as a miracle. Why is God constrained to having to fine-tune these little laws so that way we can exist rather than just we exist?
Perpetual miracles. Yeah, really interesting. So the question challenging atheism, so obviously a theist here, I would have thought, or maybe not, maybe an atheist who likes to play devil's advocate. The question is why there is life at all rather than none. And I think that, that's what we've been talking about, which is well, again, it's not why there is life. Like it's given inference to the best explanation. So it's given 2 hypotheses. What better supports what does the data better support, atheism or theism? And I don't want to get into the fine-tuning argument too much, because that's not what we're here for. But like, given all the data that we see, I think this all far better supports atheism than theism. But obviously CA maybe not. Says the fine-tuning is a problem for atheism, not theism. I completely disagree, 100%, for the reasons I've
again, the thing is, God doesn't need to fine-tune a universe. He can create a universe with life in it without any laws of physics at all. Why is he constrained to a very particular set for where it can exist, where on naturalism, that's the only way it could be? That is actually more expected on naturalism than theism, because again, God has options of having life exist without fine-tuned constants. Life can only exist in the natural world with constants consistent with life. So actually, the argument should go in the opposite direction. Now, there's also something else a bit interesting about, well, why does life exist at all? And there's actually been some interesting fundamental physics research explaining why life would even emerge as a thermodynamic process. That apparently life forms are particularly good at actually doing exchanges of energy and increasing entropy. That in states where there's like basically a difference in entropy between one region and another, the universe wants to equal that out, and life actually exists to actually use that energy difference to pump itself and going, and actually increases the increase in entropy. Life actually is then somewhat a natural explanation for what you would see in the universe, because it's doing a better job of increasing entropy and evening out the energy in the universe.
Interesting. So that's a different angle to take. Thank you for that. Challenging atheism is still coming up in the comments there with a bunch of stuff, but we won't go too much down the fine-tuning argument. I would challenge those notions completely. I think the fine-tuning argument is a very strong argument for atheism, and I think theists get it completely the wrong way around. And it's definitely, this universe is definitely not what you'd expect. I'm just editing a book by John Loftus, a sort of an extra book of his that he's going to put out of previous material, debate material and whatnot. And he's got a couple of bonus chapters at the end, arguments from the scale of the universe against God's existence, and they are really good arguments where it's just like, on balance, the scale of the universe does not support theism compared to atheism, especially, and we'll talk about this, if humanity is supposed to be the apex of creation. So how do we deal with these ideas and these problems? Well, let's start with a quick discussion of whether humanity is the apex of creation. This is a kind of human exceptionalism that you would get from the Bible quite easily, but then some will argue that actually the Bible doesn't necessarily say that we are the apex of all creation. It might just be the apex of earthly creation. Do you have anything to say about human exceptionalism in terms of sort of religion?
At the very least, if you go to the Bible, is it going to tell you that there are other civilizations out there that are at least on par with humans in terms of importance? No. The only creatures that it would discuss that might have any plausible stance of being more important than humans would be the angels. But usually the various religious doctrines are that the angels are created by God, and they are supposed to be basically here for our benefit. That in one of the stories is that Satan was cast down because he refused to worship Adam. That is not what you'd expect if the angels are the apex, but no, humanity is supposed to be the most important.
Yeah, so you get this kind of argument as to whether we're just below angels or whether angels are below us, and yeah, as you say, and that's a bit of a problem. But either way, like. So in the paper, the McNabb and McIntosh paper that we've mentioned, there's this idea that scripture is perhaps silence. So in fact, like discovering ETI, discovering alien life, intelligent life, is not a problem for theism or for and we're going to talk mainly about Christianity. Do apologize. But it's not a major problem for Christianity, because really the Bible doesn't say anything about alien life, right? And so it's just absent from there, so it doesn't cause a problem. But then you can talk about, you can possibly think that this is a form of deception, which is if there are billions of instances of alien life, at least on a par to us, and if they're discovering us, they are actually more advanced than us. So they are more intelligent than us, closer to the actual image of God, one would suppose. Then why is God not mentioning this in the perfect revelation that the Bible supposedly is?
Yeah, and there's two thoughts that come to me when looking at this, and especially the discussion in the paper from Philosophica Christi. So the first one is the Bible is silent on it because the people who wrote the Bible had simply no conception of life beyond the earth and anything that we would call biological. I mean, go to Genesis. How does it describe, the creation of the remainder of the universe? And it just says God, and he created the stars also. It's like an afterthought. It's just these little special lights that are put into the dome over the flat earth. The cosmology imagined in the Old Testament and into the New is just so pathetic and tiny compared to what we actually know the universe to be. The idea that there can be these other fantastical worlds was a later creation that the biblical authors had not even the inkling of. So the reason it's not in the Bible is because that was about as likely to be talked about as Italian plumbers hitting mushrooms. All right. It's just not in the wheelhouse of their thoughts, even though you could say that Christianity is consistent with Mario games. But boy, oh boy, you're not going to expect any discussion about that in the Bible. Now, on the other hand, the other thought I have is when they're trying to discuss the silence of the Bible, and the authors here in particular say, well, the Bible is supposed to be about God's relation to man, and it's basically God's love letter to man to explain things. But with that same analogy, it's like saying, well, this is a husband writing a love letter to a wife. It's like, but you think it's also a bit of deception if the husband also has a billion side piece wives across the galaxy that he's also sleeping with, and apparently might even have a better relationship with, and he's not telling you that at all. It's like, yeah, in marriages, we would call that cheating up the wazoo.
Yeah, at least some kind of hint, or but there's absolutely nothing. I think that the Talmud, for example, rabbinic literature mentions, I think, that God visits 18,000 stars by name every night or something like that. And you're thinking, at least they're trying to expand their horizons a little bit, but 18,000 is obviously an infinitesimal fraction compared to the reality of the universe. So you get something, and I'll refer back to my theologian friend Peter Williams, who says, talking about whether we are the pinnacle of creation, and I'll just share something actually before, just to show you that, hey, there are people who very much think that we're the pinnacle of creation. So creation.com, and it might be that these people are more of the creationist ilk, but it the claims on this particular site are basically that Earth and humans are definitely the pinnacle of creation. Another reason why our planet, the Earth, is a special place is that many crucial factors have to be just right for a world to support life. And in the case of the Earth, all those factors are exactly right. So it's saying, our Earth is particular. We are the pinnacle. There's powerful evidence that the universe, the solar system, the Earth are only a few thousand years old, blah, blah, blah. Of course, that's nonsense. But then there was a bit I just wanted to say, which is... here we go. So the universe is unimaginably vast and with hundreds of billions, perhaps trillions of galaxies. If the Earth were at or near the center of this universe, it would suggest that man's home is very special and that man himself is special too. But that is unacceptable to secular scientists and is one reason why their Big Bang hypothesis proposes that the universe has no boundary and no center. However, there's increasing evidence that the universe does indeed have a boundary and a center, and that our own Milky Way galaxy is at or near the center. The Bible does not say that the Earth is at the center of the universe, but such a finding would affirm the special place that man holds in God's plan. That's like having your cake and eating it too. It's just like...
That has two errors in it right there, actually, that I need to point out. One is scientific. No, the Milky Way galaxy is not the center of the universe. In fact, the universe has no center. So first off, they don't know cosmology. So no. Imagine that. Creationists don't know science. That's one thing. But two, the center of the universe in the old pre-Copernican cosmology wasn't because the Earth was special. In the older medieval cosmology, the Earth is basically where all the crap of the universe falls to. All the heavy grimy, dirty, changeable stuff is down there. But the angelic, wonderful, unchanging stuff is beyond the earth. The stuff at the center is basically all the stuff that clumps together at the bottom of basically the cosmic toilet. So centrality does not mean importance. That's a modern notion. In the medieval world, we're the center of the universe because we're the garbage.
Interesting. I just want to challenge this. Challenging atheism. Thanks for commenting on all that. But I mean, each human cell hosts 2.3 billion proteins. Or 2 to 3 billion proteins. The human body has 37 trillion cells. We are special. No, special is definitely demarcated at 63 billion. So, 63 trillion. 63 trillion cells is the demarcation between not special and special. So that's actually...
No. I think you need to get up on the most recent science on that. The proper number is 69 trillion.
69 trillion. We're going to have to... sources, please. Citations required. I would just like challenge...
Wait. No, bring that back one. I've loved that first sentence in that last comment you had up. Generalizations are never good. I hope that's a joke.
Explain.
Generalizations are never good. That's a general statement.
Yeah, God, brilliant.
So I'm hoping that's just to have some fun, and in which case we're having fun all together.
that's like a drop.
When all scientific fathers were creationists. Oh, by the way, the fathers of creation, the scientific fathers, guess what? Don't know what we know now. Imagine that. Guess what? Johannes Kepler was an astrologer. Does that mean that astrology is science? No. Guess what? Because we now know astrology is butt kiss bull honky. I'm trying to keep things PG here. So the fact of the matter is we've actually learned a lot since the last 400 years. So maybe we don't believe the same things as the people who started things out. And also, if you want to talk about the fathers of science, let's go back to the person who invented the concept of nature, Thales, who was a total pagan Greek philosopher. So, sorry, that argument doesn't fly because of facts.
And the last thing, I won't post anything by them again, but many modern scientists today are creationists. 65% of Nobel Prize winners in the last century were Christians.
That's not the same thing.
Yeah, and also there's a problem with default like science, and also there's default belief systems in certain areas of more progressive societies, and there are loads of issues with those sorts of claims. But yeah, I've got to a point now where I don't even bother debating creationists because they exist on a different plane of evaluating data. That anything I say is irrelevant because it doesn't wash. Yeah. And actually, we were speaking different languages, so let's not speak.
Yeah. We probably should be careful. When I'm saying creationists, I'm probably saying shorthand for young Earth creationists.
Yeah.
Old Earth creationists that basically all of science is true, but God was responsible some way, somehow. That could be consistent with science, but the ones that are actually the ones like making all the claims in the public school that evolution is a lie from the devil. Those are young Earth creationists, and they're the ones who show they are not scientists and they are not winning Nobel Prizes.
So those kind of the people who believe humans are definitely the apex of creation, as I showed you from creation.com, I think discovery of intelligent alien life would be a problem for those people. They would definitely have to they wouldn't necessarily have to reject Christianity, but they would definitely have to change their worldview from that kind of creationist center of the earth, but then goodness me, if they can't even carbon date, they can't properly evaluate plate tectonics and carbon dating and so on and so forth, then alien life form is whatever. But my friend Peter S. Williams again says about human exceptionalism, quote, personal correspondence, I don't think that the idea that we are the pinnacle of creation is a biblical one. So the Bible depicts humans, he says, as intended stewards placed over the earth and its animals, but also describes human as being created by God, quote, a little lower than the angels. So it's actually angels that are the pinnacle of creation. And we kind of you mentioned that before. If there are aliens who are persons, I suppose they may or may not be in some senses greater than humans. So he's happy to say, do you know what, then aliens might be a little bit more advanced than us, but it doesn't really mess with my theology. I don't really have a problem with that.
Oh, I think he's actually completely undone his theology by saying the angels are the apex and the more important thing to God, because then it begs the question, why make these sacks of meat if angels are supposed to be the pinnacle? And by the way, angels don't need this universe. So quite frankly, if angels are the pinnacle, the rest of the universe, the natural world, doesn't need to exist.
Interesting. Yes. So yeah, could be a bit of a problem there. And the only other thing we talked a little bit about deception. I just want to make sure I've got all the questions I had written down here for this, which is if the Bible is completely silent about extraterrestrial intelligent life, why has God kept that knowledge and revelation of these other life forms from us? Is Scripture's silence some form of deception? Is God knowingly deceiving us? The question for theologians here is whether God is distorting perhaps our knowledge. Rather than not saying something, is God, to deceive us, would he need to distort knowledge of aliens rather than not mention them? God appears to do neither, given the lack of reference to aliens anywhere in any meaningful Orthodox revelation. So yeah, I just think that if aliens are greater than us in some way, then it would be bizarre not to make any reference to them at all if God knew that we were going to come across them.
And all the more so if the purpose is, especially within the Christian context, of evangelizing. So for example, at the Pentecost, where the disciples are given the ability to speak in tongues, and they're speaking in these various tongues of the world, none of the tongues they are said to speak is Klingon. So again, it seems like the authors don't even have the concept that there are groups out there that speak languages that they've never even heard of.
They don't have the concept of Star Trek. It's just not on. So then so let's, as we said, assume that there are all these intelligent alien life forms out there, and arguably far more intelligent than us. And in fact, that's what I think the Copernican argument or evaluation. There's a paper, and I'll show it again here, or not again. I haven't shown it yet. But there's a paper by Ruhmkorff called The Copernican Principle and Arguments from Evil. And he says that actually finding huge amounts of intelligent life form out there lowers the probability of God existing. So this increases the probability of atheism, and he discusses that. And we won't go into crazy amounts of detail about this, but he talks about the Copernican Principle, which is this idea that, you know, if you're the tallest person in your house, right, then you know, you might think, hey, I'm the tallest person in existence, but actually, you know, you go out into your village, you're less likely to be the tallest person in the village. And if you talk about your country, you're even less likely. If you talk about the world, then actually you're probably somewhere right in the middle, or you may even be really down low, or you could be up high, but the probability is that you aren't. And so the idea is that if we think about evil existing in the world, there's probably far more greater evil out there than the evil we have, the suffering we have here. But we'll get onto that a bit later when we talk about the problem of evil. But I want to talk about, like, if there are alien life forms out there, there's probably instances of alien life forms being far more intelligent than us. So the Copernican Principle is not just about, as he uses it, in a problem of evil sense, but you can use it to just say that actually is incredibly likely there's going to be huge amounts of much greater intelligence than that which we have. Mm-hmm. Would you agree?
Yeah, that should be the expectation, that if, you know, from the Copernican Principle, we would expect, without any other information, to think we'd be in the middle of the pack, which of course means there's going to be peoples of sorts well beyond our abilities. So if and when we find another civilization, we should have good reason to expect them to be more intelligent than us.
So, and this is what we're going to talk about. Thank you so much, James A, who was a guest the other day. Thank you. James says, and thanks for the super chat. It's really, really generous. If anyone's got any super chats, please get them in. It does allow me to keep doing what I'm doing. According to Ken Ham, if we ever run into intelligent aliens, we should not bother with them. They are all damned, as Jesus only died for humans. We're just going to get on to talking about atonement now. So thank you, James. James is really good. And thanks for your support. We are going to talk about sin and atonement. So taking the Copernican Principle, there are going to be moral creatures out there, and you could even argue more moral than us, or more moral complexity than us. I don't know. We're going to be in the middle somewhere, arguably. So if there is intelligent life out there, we should assume, would you agree, that that intelligent life has a moral dimension?
I'm just trying to think of any cases where that couldn't possibly be the case. I'm just trying to imagine a civilization that produces an AI that basically takes over, and all that's left of that civilization is their machines. I'm trying to think of any counter case, but it seems like any sort of civilization with multiple members is going to have behaviors that can be considered either pro-social or anti-social, and that would have moral dimension to it. So it's hard to come up with a counterexample.
Okay, good answer. Given this kind of the regularity of the universe argument, again, a principle of regularity, then you would assume that the intelligent life out there is equally like us, moral, and therefore commits sin, right? So I know, so some theists, C.S. Lewis played around with this with his cosmic trilogy that he wrote. He wrote a trilogy whereby, humans go up to Venus and Mars, a little bit limited there, and find these people who are living, almost paradise-like lives because they are not fallen. And in fact, we take our fallen nature with us, almost, I suppose, maybe like a sort of kind of virus or something. So there could be this scenario whereby there's huge amounts of alien life that isn't fallen, that is able to live moral lives that just so happen to not require some kind of salvation. What would you say to that?
So this actually reminds me of a few things that came up in this paper that just show that there's like internal contradictions within the various defenses of Christianity in here. So for example, there's the first one. If it's the case that a civilization can exist, not just individuals, but an entire civilization that can exist in an unfallen state, it begs the question why we are in a fallen state, why we failed and we are sinful, because apparently it is completely within the power of God to create moral creatures with free will, with all those things, and not fall. The fact that we're fallen, that has to imply that we are created poorly. And that is then evidence against the theology there. So that's one issue. Now, in the paper, they try
absolutely
to bring
agree. You beat me to it. Yeah, really good. Like, why is it that they get a nice bite of the apple and we get the rotten apple? Yeah.
In fact, there's like say a somewhat conflicting idea in this paper. So they bring up Alvin Plantinga about possible worlds and just how awesome the gospel story is. Let me quote the part that I highlighted. Alvin Plantinga has argued that possible worlds featuring the events of the fall, incarnation, and atonement are better than worlds that don't. The gospel story, that is the story of God becoming incarnate, dying a brutal death, and resurrecting triumphantly to the eternal salvation of mankind, quote, is not merely the greatest story ever told, it is the greatest story that could be told. He is arguing that it is actually better to have a fallen state in the universe.
But then you've got a real problem there, because then you say, well, if that's better, then you can imagine a world that's got 50 times worse evil than we have, and that would be even better. But then he'd equally be arguing that if we weren't fallen, guaranteed he'd be arguing that that's a perfect world as well, because we haven't fallen. So do you know what? It's like, heads I win, tails I win. Just like there's just like having his cake and eating it. So
and like I say, it just shows like internal conflict within the paper, where they say in some places, it's totally fine that there are aliens that have never fallen, and here the only universes that are actually good are the ones with fallen people in it. It's like, no, you can't have both and say not being fallen is great, wonderful, and fine, and it's actually better if you completely screwed up and now you're going to hell.
Yeah, and then everywhere in between, and then past that, and it's like,
it also creates an infinity problem as well, because if it's the case that fallen worlds are better than non-fallen ones, then we should expect there to be a fall in every single alien world, and what's better than a finite number of falls? An infinite number. So there should be an infinite amount of sin in the universe in the perfect creation of God.
Yeah, problem. Can I just say thank you so much to Sabra Bösewicht. Another wonderful conversation. Thanks. Oh, that's really, really kind of you. And there were, like just a second ago, a few had just dropped off. But the most viewers I've ever had for a live, so that's great. I mean, I'm a tiny channel, right? So, you know, I appreciate all of you. But thank you so much. Please like, subscribe, share, do all that stuff. So thank you so much, Sabra. It's really, really kind. Aaron, you were talking about planting, which I think is a really good time to bring in. He talked about trans world depravity, this idea that, you know, you've got like depravity is just like a necessary, or, you know, it's just an aspect of humanity. Well, actually, we're talking now about trans universe depravity, and it's the same kind of principle. So the idea that although in the paper they talk about trans planet, but that's wrong. That's just the same as trans world. They got the wrong word there. It should be trans universe. So trans universe planet depravity is this idea that, yeah, okay, that if you're going to have all this intelligent alien life all over the universe, and they are all moral creatures, moral life forms, then they as well will be requiring some kind of salvation, because, you know, there's all this suffering and evil, all this evil perpetuated by those moral creatures. So then the question is our version of salvation, like the incarnation of God in the form of man on earth, is that A, the only way of getting redemption and salvation, and B, the best way? In other words, if you have all these other instances of requiring some kind of salvation, would they all require an incarnation of God in whatever form those life forms have? Or is there other ways that they can achieve redemption and salvation? And then the following question is, well, if there are other ways, why do they have other ways and we have this way? Are they just luckily just exactly of equal value? Or is one salvation better? And in which case, why does one life form get that salvation and this life form gets a slightly worse salvation? So therefore, really, any kind of salvation should be the optimal best salvation, given that God is all loving. Anything to say to any of that?
Yeah, it seems like, you know, they are trying to throw out all the possible ways of how they could find some way of being consistent without holding to any one in particular. So, you know, it shows the vastness of the logical landscape that possibilities could exist in. So let's pop around a few and see what would be the consequences for that. So one, they have the idea in here that when they say that, you know, God took on human form for the forgiveness of sins, human form is basically all rational creatures. So coming once onto earth is sufficient for the salvation of the entire universe and all the intelligent creatures out there. So Jesus doesn't have to incarnate himself necessarily on every single planet with civilizations on it. That is a one-time thing, and that's all that's necessary. Okay, so it does, of course, have issues like, well, we're the only planet then that got the Jesus, so we're the only planet that knows. So what is the salvation plan for the trillions of other possible civilizations?
They just get this magic TV screen that just pops up and then just shows this movie of Jesus, and everyone goes, "Oh, that of these different life forms that look completely different to them," and they're like, "Oh, yeah. Oh, that's brilliant."
Well, the thing is, though, we know that's unlikely because of human history. Most people, up until basically the conquest of the conquistadors, had never heard of this Jesus story. The entire Western Hemisphere had no knowledge of this at all. Those in Southeast Asia didn't know that until Jesuits started showing up and preaching it, things like that. If word of mouth from humans is the way that information gets out there, then it is basically guaranteeing that the vast majority of civilizations in the universe will never hear the story. Now, conversely, if they do know the story, then of course, why is it that we need evangelists here on Earth? If the people of Omicron Persei 8 can get the story without human intervention, then what the good are evangelicals here on Earth? It seems like they are at best superfluous.
It's really good. Thank you for that, Aaron. I like, these are really good arguments that I hadn't quite thought of yet. So not that I would have done, but so what this then suggests is that an incarnation or some kind of redemption salvation thing, I would argue the same incarnation, the same kind of value of mechanism, like in terms of optimal lovingness, has to take place in every single instance of intelligent life form in the universe. Now, what this means very seriously is that Jesus isn't just Jesus. There are a billion, a trillion Jesuses, maybe more, maybe nearly infinite Jesuses, like instances of incarnation in different cultures and different alien life forms around the universe. And then you're thinking, well, actually, a large majority, a huge amount of these will be concurrent. They'll be happening simultaneously. So God would have to literally split himself amongst a whole bunch of different civilizations and live in different alien ways, and go through some kind of sacrifice to bring about redemption and so on and so forth. And so my conclusion would be that would happen trillions of times. You would get trillions of Jesuses. What do you have to say to that?
That seems, like I say, if it's the case that incarnation is necessary for salvation, then you're going to expect lots and lots of Jesuses. But on the other hand, there are some issues I have found in scripture that would make that difficult. So in the paper, they try arguing, saying, hey, there's no issue with Jesus becoming incarnate multiple times. But I decided to do a bit of reading of one of the more philosophical, complicated theology books of the New Testament, the Epistle to the Hebrews. And there, it's actually rather explicit that Jesus enters the celestial temple one time to commit. So let me do just a quick reading, because we need the Bible reading in this section. So this is from Hebrew 9s. I'm going to start reading from verse 11. But now Christ has come as the high priest of the good things to come. He passed through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, and he entered once and for all into the most holy place, not by the blood of goats and calves, but by his own blood. So he himself secured eternal redemption. And when they say tent, they really mean the celestial temple. That the temple that was in Jerusalem was just a copy of the real, true heavenly temple. And by the way, this also meant that the early Christians basically had the view of the quote unquote scientists of that time, where they basically imagined a spherical earth, but with multiple spheres for each of the planets, and that the temple is in one of these heavenly spheres. Again, their cosmology is what we would call in the business wrong. But most importantly, it is explicit that Jesus was supposed to have done a one-time sacrifice for the forgiveness of sins to counteract the fact that otherwise these sacrifices had to be done year after year on earth. This is saying, no, this is a one-time done deal thing. So the idea is like Jesus only had to do this one time, except for the trillions of times he has to do it throughout the rest of the cosmos, even though he's supposed to do this special sacrifice in the literal cosmic temple. It's, again, you would expect from reading that there should only have been one Jesus sacrifice.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to bring into play Thomas Paine, who in The Age of Reason, way back when, in the 1700s, late 1700s, I think, said to this, his quote, "To believe that God created a plurality of worlds, at least as numerous as what we call stars, renders the Christian system of faith at once little and ridiculous, and scatters it in the mind like feathers in the air. The two beliefs cannot be held together in the same mind, and he who thinks that he believes both has thought but little of either." So it's interesting that he was thinking about this at the time as well. So I just want to get a super chat in before I forget. So Sohan, thank you, Sohan. That's really, really kind of you. If humans and and it's great to have you here as well. If humans and ETIs, so aliens, end up in the same afterlife, why have none of those, including Catholic saints, who've had afterlife visions, noticed the ETIs? That's a really interesting point. Like all these, like, oh, I saw heaven, or I got glimpses of heaven. Like no one sees like all the trillions of alien life forms bumbling around doing. Whatever.
That is a very solid point. And I also need to be on full disclosure. Sohan is a friend of mine here in the Boston area. So thank you for listening, and thank you for donating. You're making the channel all the stronger.
Yeah, that's really, really, really great to have you here.
In fact, actually, it even brings up, I would say, another point. Or do you need to go to another super chat?
No, go. Yeah, okay. You said.
Because here's something that this paper fails to even bring up at all, and Sohan's question kind of goes into. What about the religion or lack of religion of the aliens? That's something they don't even consider here, really. And here's the thing. What if the aliens finally come. They land on the lawn in front of the White House, have their meetings with President Biden, and then as they're supposedly walking, I guess they'll have feet in this example, they're walking by and they see one of the big cathedrals in DC. Biden, a Catholic, tries to explain what it is, and the aliens scratch their whatever they have for heads and say, what's this God concept? This isn't even like a coherent idea. That's like saying rocks can talk. What are you even talking about? How do we deal with the idea then that here are clearly intelligent creatures, moral creatures, creatures far beyond us, and yet don't even have the God concept? How does that fit with all these other theologies about civilizations, needing God for all these sorts of things? Like if we, run into creatures and they don't even have the conceptual framework of religion, how they don't even consider that possibility in this paper. And I think that would be dumbfounding if, they say like, well, what if we run into the aliens and they're Christians or they have some sort of theistic belief? Yeah, that probably would be some power, but let's run that in reverse. What if they don't even have the idea of theology? How are then you going to tell them, well, you need to accept this, salvation plan? It's like, you're just making up words. Eschatology, what? It's like, no, you might as well be talking about talking rocks. It makes absolutely no sense to us. And they don't even consider that possibility that the aliens are even, there's arguments on the internet about are babies atheists, like, because, they don't even have like conceptions and things like that. If the aliens are like babies in that sort of atheistic sense, that the conceptual framework doesn't even exist, and yet they can have these advanced civilizations, that should be, I think, detrimental to the ideas that religion is necessary for society or for morals or anything else. If there are beings that are doing an even better job than us and might even be doing a better job because they don't have religion, they don't even consider that possibility in this paper.
Yeah, interesting. I just want to make reference, because it is spam o'clock, to my recent book, 30 Arguments Against the Existence of God, Heaven, Hell, Satan, and Divine Design. And this is pertinent to this particular point, because in that and in other writing I've done and books, I've talked about how atonement doesn't make sense. Actually, in my resurrection book, how atonement doesn't make sense, because if you have Omni-God, who is all-knowing, all-loving, and all-powerful, and knows in advance everything that will come to pass, all counterfactuals, all like if-then statements about creation or potential creation, and knows that Adam and Eve will eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge of good and evil and will fall, or knows that humans will be fallen or depraved or whatever your explanation of reality is. But God knows that in advance, but designs and creates anyway, or creates that design anyway, then God is culpable for the sins of humanity, because God has designed humanity such that they sin and know that they will do that, and creates them anyway to do that. So when then God demands payment for these sins, God is demanding payment for his own design weaknesses, or something that he's purposefully designed to happen, and then demands payment for that. So the whole, I would argue, and I've simplified it quite a bit here, but I would argue that atonement is a fundamentally broken idea. Now, if you think that it's a broken idea once, then I'm not sure doing it 1 trillion times makes it any better.
Practice.
Practice makes imperfect. It's like, I've screwed up once, I might as well just whatever. But then, so God's almost like creating all these instances of intelligent life forms everywhere, and then after creating them, jumping around the universe and putting these band-aids, these plasters on each civilization, going, let's fix that by having an incarnation of me, let's fix that by having an incarnation of me and sacrificing myself to myself so I can sit on my own right hand, but there's going to be trillions of me sitting on my own right hand, and then just, to me, there's some kind of intuitive problem I have that with vast amounts of intelligent alien moral life that makes the whole thesis of God even more improbable, even more problematic.
Yeah. And I would say even more so if we discover in that diversity of life out there that some of them don't need the salvation plan, because again, it just shows, it undermines the idea that was somehow necessary on the part of God's creation. If you could find living examples of things that go against that, if you find the black swans, then you can't say white swans are a logical necessity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I will just get a super chat before we go. And Renaissance Patents thank you so much, VA, by the way. Vaguely Agnostic, always such a good supporter of the channel. $6.66. Thank you. Renaissance painters in the 16th century illustrated many different UFO shapes in their paintings and frescoes. I don't know if this is like, Rorschach, whatever the blots where you can see things that are.
Yeah, it's not so much a Rorschach test. I know what he's actually referring to because I've seen people also discuss this because it comes up in the show Ancient Aliens that in these things it looks like there's some sort of like light beam coming from the sky, almost like some sort of UFO thing. But if you look at the actual history of the art, like in previous forms and how it's being used, what you find is that's not a UFO. That's literally the heavens opening up and with like angels surrounding that, and that's a beam coming down from God from the heavens. And that's basically what they're illustrating in these frescoes. There's not the case that there was some 16th century Italian who had encounters with aliens and then hid it in his paintings. He's following this artistic tradition of lights coming down from heaven, which again was an artistic tradition, not historical memory.
Yeah, you say that, but it really is aliens, isn't it?
I need to get my hair up and
yeah. But so I listened. So I've got The Demon Haunted World by Carl Sagan. I meant to do a couple of Carl Sagan quotes already, but I forgot to. And I listened to that recently because I've had it on my bookshelf. Never got around to reading it. I thought, right, the only way I'm going to do it is when I mow the lawn and listen to it. So I listened to it, wondering whether it would still hold its own, given that it's 25 years old or however old it is as a book now. And you know what? I was blown away by it. Still, I just thought it's a phenomenal book. But he was talking about how where we have alien experiences and, abduction stories and whatever, that used to be like spirits and demons and angels. And, it's just you use whatever's in your cultural like toolbox to
exactly.
be able to.
Yeah, there's actually the good example of that, of people who will have like waking dreams where they feel like there's something on their chest so they can't get up, and it's some sort of demonic force.
I've had sleep paralysis. Yeah, my sister used to get it a lot.
Yeah,
but yeah.
I haven't, but like I've heard stories, and like, yeah, it's extremely culturally relative. In Japan, the image of the creature that's on top of you is different than when you're in the Christian world, and now it's much more alien-like. Yeah, it seems to be what are the culturally available images to you. In fact, one of the things I remember looking at for a while was our current image of what an extraterrestrial is. Big head, large eyes, gray skin, things like that. That appears to actually be the result of the testimony of Barney and Betty Hill, who said they were abducted in the 1960s. And it was argued well by one of my other skeptic friends in this, Jason Colavito, that it looks like they were probably watching episodes of a TV show at the time called The Outer Limits. It was in the early 60s as well. And it had creatures that kind of like fit that description. Because if you go before the testimony of Barney and Betty Hill, the images of the aliens that the people saw was extremely diverse. Sometimes they're just 6-foot white Norwegian people. Sometimes they're reptilian creatures, and it seemed to change, but it only really started becoming solidified, the bulbous gray aliens, starting like the 80s and 90s, once that testimony was becoming more and more widespreadly known.
Yeah, Carl Sagan talks about that couple in the Demon Haunted World as well. Just a big shout out to Von Daniken and Graham Hancock. I remember reading Chariots of the Gods. Many claims of aliens in cave paintings, all proved bogus, of course. Yeah, and there are plenty of authors and create content creators who will perpetuate that, and that is a problem. So, okay, back to trillions of Jesuses, right? So, as I said, there are potentially trillions of Jesuses, more Jesuses, literally more incarnations of God than humans have ever existed on Earth. Like, which makes you think, well, your creation really isn't that good if you are having to sacrifice yourself 1 trillion times to pay yourself for the sins of all these life forms that you knew would do this anyway. It's all a bit bizarre. Do you have anything more to say on that?
No, I don't think I can add to just the general unexpected bizarreness of that sort of thing. At the very least, it's not what you would expect that this one-time atonement for sins needs to be repeated across the universe.
Yeah. And all these many Gizai, as my friend Paul Jenkins says, many Gizai turning up. I'm not sure if that's a correct declension of Jesus.
It's not just because
oh
Jesus
God, I always got the answer.
Well, because Jesus is ultimately from Hebrew, so when you put it into Latin or Greek, it's actually not declinable.
Of course. Of course. So, and of course, these ideas that there are these trillions of other intelligent life forms and trillions of Jesuses or Gizai, shows that we would be commonplace, like distinct average Joes, that we are definitely not the apex of creation. Thomas Paine says, again, in The Age of Reason, are we to suppose that every world in the boundless creation had an Eve, an apple, a serpent, and a redeemer? In this case, the person who is irreverently called the Son of God, and sometimes God himself, would have nothing else to do than to travel from world to world in an endless succession of deaths, that's with scarcely a momentary interval of life.
Yeah, it actually, I would extend this to the thought that if the idea of the atonement will only make sense within Judaism, then that requires there to be basically Jews and Judaism in every possible civilization throughout the universe. So it is a bit interesting to imagine the civilization around Alpha Centauri, and you will also find they have a Hasidic community.
Yeah.
It's not something you would expect, but I guess it's now a requirement if the only way that salvation makes sense is within the bounds of Judaism. And now you have to repeat that trillions of times.
There are trillions of walls with like little bits of paper just putting them all over the universe. Yeah. And in the paper you talk, you've mentioned several times the Macintosh and McNabb paper. They talk about, well, okay, let's try and explain how could God be in so many places and so many times as distinct minds operating concurrently, arguably, in all these different civilizations in different corners of the universe, et cetera, et cetera. And they say, well, okay, what model can we do to kind of understand this? And they talk about multiple personality disorder, and they say obviously it's a disorder in humanity but not in God, it'll be actually just wonderful type thing. I'm paraphrasing obviously, but the idea that we can understand multiple personality disorder in humans, so God could just be able to have multiple personalities spread and incarnated all throughout the universe.
Well, I guess it's interesting to see that once again Christians have fallen into pantheism, because apparently if Jesus can be in multiple minds, well, why can't he be in literally all minds? God is every one. So yeah, this is pantheism.
Yeah, and these things do make you think, well, why not? And why, if that can exist in that form, then why isn't God just existing in all of us? And then, my friend Peter S. Williams again says, I'm not convinced that there is a good reason to think that aliens would be excluded from entering into a relationship with God in Christ. And I'm not convinced this would necessarily require multiple incarnations, or that if it does, that such a concept is incoherent. So he's basically saying, as a theologian, he's saying there could be multiple incarnations of Jesus. I don't have a problem with that. But likewise, there might only be one incarnation, and I'm cool with that as well. And somehow, but as you said earlier, how would these other civilizations and instances of intelligent alien life be able to access the redemptive qualities of the incarnation of Jesus on Earth? And if this is such a good way of doing things, why can't they? It's unfair. So the problem when you have an asymmetry, when you have like it happened over here but not like that over there, whenever you have an asymmetry, if any aspect of that is not a complete parity, like a complete equalness of lovingness, of positive value or even negative value, then God is being unfair to some people. And if God is unfair in any instance, which I argue plentifully in here, I mean, there's so many instances of unfairness, that God is not all loving. and therefore omni-God doesn't exist. So I think, if it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander, or if it's good for the goose, it's good for trillions of geese.
Yeah. I think it also shows, actually, reading this paper and hearing the comments you had also just, really makes me think even less of theology as an approach, because it seems like all that is required for theology isn't what's most probable, but just, is it logically possible? And that's just enough. Because it seems like, so unless you can prove it's logically impossible that Jesus can only have one incarnation or such and that, then there's no problem actually believing it. And that just seems like a pretty bad standard, especially because we're dealing with these things called words that we can change the definition of. Like in this paper, they changed the definition of human nature, because now they have extended it to all rational beings across the universe. Well, that's at least not what was intended in the early days, because that intention wasn't even a possibility. But if you're just going to change the word so that way things now become logically impossible, these arguments just aren't even that interesting or useful. It's basically, you're playing a chess game where you get to change the rules when you find out that's going to corner you. And that, to me, isn't even a game that's even worth playing.
Yeah, and that's the paper I'm talking about. It is freely available online at philarchive.org. Houston, do we have a problem? Extraterrestrial, intelligent life, and Christian belief. I think 2019 paper, maybe. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it was published it was published last year in Philosophica Christi, but this is the free version, not the published version, which you have to pay like $50 to get.
Right. Yeah. Sorry. So that's a 2021 version. The Ruhmkorff paper is 2019, which we're going to come on to now. So, so this idea of atonement happening trillions of times, I think, is a huge problem, and it renders, I think, theology a bit incoherent. And you're right, but like I keep talking about this at the moment, which is the job of theology. And this is how I've just written a big piece on Only Sky. Please go and check it out. It's a feature article. So it's a big old proper article on slavery and how biblical scholars excuse slavery. And you will have seen it from my my YouTube series I'm doing on that, serializing. Oh, it's next door. Hector Avalos's book. But the idea is that theologians approach their job as keeping God or the Bible up here at all costs. And it doesn't matter how you do it, and whether it's like, this is how it could work, and I'm supposing this might happen. Peter Williams did that in his private talk, email to me about this, what we're talking about tonight. He said, well, supposing this and supposing that. And it's like, well, yeah, if you're just going to like throw out these real modal kind of like low probability, well, this is what could happen. It's the possibility ergo probability fallacy. It's like, well, this could happen, therefore it's what did happen. And I have a real problem with that. And theology is just a huge attempt to keep the primacy of God and the Bible, the perfection of these entities up here, no matter what. And that's your job. It's not looking at evidence and building up to a conclusion. It's starting with that conclusion and working backwards and doing everything you can to work backwards from there to keep that up there. Would you agree?
Unfortunately, that is what I see in theology. And if you don't have to limit yourself on what is probable and just whatever is, at least logically possible, that would actually be the complete undoing of the scientific method. We could still say the Earth is the center of the universe, and be damned all the other evidences that show the Earth is moving. We can find some way that is logically possible, consistent with the evidence of our eyes and our instruments. But if we went that way, we would not have pretty much our modern civilization.
So thank you so much again to Sohan. Would atonement occur in the universe simultaneously, regardless of distance from Earth? Would the new creation, if so, everyone would be able to see old creation through telescopes for long after? You explain that to me, how you understand that, Aaron.
So I think in particular, because like in the stories of like the book of Revelation and that, where you have the end of the world cataclysm and then you have a new heaven and a new earth with like the descent of the heavenly temple down to earth and things like that. So it seems like if this event isn't happening everywhere in the universe at once, maybe we get Jesus 10,000 years after another civilization does. So maybe in theory, we could point our telescopes, see some other planet, and see, oh, this planet doesn't actually consist of the regular forms of matter and things like that. They are now a new celestialized form of universe in this world because they've already gone through their apocalypse and their new creation there. Now, on the other hand, if everywhere, I guess, happens all at once, well, that definitely proves that Jesus can travel at light speed, or much, much faster than light speed.
Or is indeed omnipresent. But then, it plays around with the like fully man, fully God. I mean, the whole concept is a pretty problematic one anyway.
Yeah. Though on the other hand, it is also worth noting that the notions that they had in the Book of Revelation was that the heavenly realm would descend to earth because heaven is above us. Well, that doesn't work for the whole universe because the whole universe doesn't have an above.
And up, down. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. So again, the old conception that the writers of the Old and New Testament have is just so completely inconsistent with how the universe actually is as determined by science that trying to fit how redemption works in there makes about as much sense. I try to think of a good bad example right now, but all I can think of is just compatibility issues. It's like trying to take an old Atari game and stick it in my PlayStation 4. It's just not an even sensible thing to try.
Yeah. And thank you, Sohan. That's a really good question that I think Aaron did really good justice to. Just problem after problem. And so, okay, so the one of the other of the six areas that they take issue with, one of the other ones is tradition and narrative. Two of them, tradition and narrative. I think I would agree with the paper writers that they aren't particularly a problem because, we've had lots of changes of stuff over time, and tradition, falls by the wayside, and religion adapts. That's the adaptability of religion, in light of nuclear warfare, in light of all technological advances, in light of discovering new civilizations in different parts of the world, and landing on the moon, religion adapts. So like the tradition thing, I don't think is a problem. Narrative is interesting. What is a narrative, and how does discovering alien life fit in with our narrative? And then do we again, without any mention in any of the revelations, we have to construct a new narrative out of nothing that has been divinely revealed, but only alienly revealed.
Yeah, and also in that section, they also talk about the issue that ET exists, comes to Earth, and is hostile.
And what's the problem with that?
So they tried dealing with that problem and trying to see, how it can fit the narrative. So the aliens come, and how does humanity react? Can that still be consistent with the thing? And so they try to give a couple examples from a few different forms of sci-fi. So, for example, they mentioned the Mel Gibson movie Signs, where the aliens come, but they're ultimately defeated, and providentially, because basically God had set the things in motion so that way the humans could actually defeat the technologically superior aliens. So, for example, spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, but apparently the number one weakness of the aliens is water.
Yeah, that's a bit of a problem.
They come to a planet mostly covered in water and think they're going to defeat the humans, not with their super advanced technology, not with weapons, but we're going to come around and apparently defeat all the humans in hand-to-hand combat on a planet that rains. Now, this is besides the point. Let's get past the whole M. Night Shyamalan, not at his best sort of thing. The real thing is they're showing it's like, hey, here's where God's providence comes in. So even when the hostile aliens come in, there is ultimate salvation, and we can see the plan of faith and providence in our world. And they try to give a couple other examples there. And so here's the thing. I am afraid that the theologians whose job is to try to imagine ways to fit God into the universe are just not sufficiently imaginative when it comes to science fiction, because they have not done their homework and they have not thought about the sorts of issues that would really happen if ET comes by. So I want to read a line. I read it beforehand, and I want to read it again because it's the part that really shows that these guys failed to do their due diligence in terms of science fiction homework. And I will give everyone an assignment because I'm a former teacher. I give homework. So here's the line in their narrative section. It's fascinating to us that there are so many works of fiction which explore the relationship between faith and the existence of ETI. In fact, we aren't aware of a single example where the existence of ETI is presented as incompatible with traditional religious belief. You can only write that if you do not read science fiction full stop. Because when I read that, instantly into my head came up 3 different stories from Arthur C. Clarke, one of the most important figures in 20th century science fiction, and you definitely have heard of him if you've ever heard of things like 2001: A Space Odyssey, for example, and many other stories. So I'm just going to give some really quick examples of Arthur C. Clarke showing what happens when the aliens come by and how it actually does upend traditional religion. So one of Arthur C. Clarke's first major novels, Childhood's End, right at the very beginning, the aliens come, humanity is like, whoa, religion actually completely falls by the wayside. And one of the interesting revelations is when the aliens finally reveal themselves, and they were reluctant to for a long time, they come out and they look exactly like Christian devils. And the reason was they had come to Earth earlier in the past, but their first contact mission didn't succeed, and that the beliefs about devils became mythologized because of that failed interaction earlier in human history. So the aliens are our gods and upend all of our religious beliefs. And what we thought was evil is actually one of the greatest goods and salvation sources in the universe. Does that upend traditional religion? I'd say so. Arthur C. Clarke was direct about that. From around the same time, his short story called The Star, where a Jesuit astrophysicist going out and exploring the remnants of this lost civilization that was destroyed by a supernova had gone off. They learned that this, the civilization had like beautiful culture, was completely peaceful and things like that. And then the star exploded and destroyed them, which was already sad. But then the astrophysicist Jesuit does the math and realizes this exploding star was the Star of Bethlehem. So God destroyed this civilization so he could have the appropriate light show for the New Testament story. And this just destroys the faith of the Jesuits. Like, oh God, why did you condemn this wonderful civilization to the fire? You could have done this with any other star, but you decided to destroy this wonderful, beautiful civilization. Again, does that sound like it conforms well to traditional religion? Let's go for another one. So there's another short story that Arthur C. Clarke will revisit a bunch of times called The Sentinel. The version in particular that comes to mind is from another story called The Foundations of Paradise, which is actually about building the first space elevator. In that story, there's also just this little aside where, and this alien probe came by, made first contact with humans. And theologians try also communicating with this extremely intelligent probe and, want to ask what it knows about God. And it's like, well, what the hell are you talking about? And they actually try sending the works of Thomas Aquinas to the alien probe to explain itself. And the probe sends back, and here's all the logical mistakes that Aquinas made. And the humans realize, well, shoot, they just disproved God to us. Does that sound consistent with traditional theism? All right. And that's just 3 stories from one author I just had instantly pop into my head. Now, let's be fair. None of those are cases where the aliens come and are hostile to humans. So how about I give another example of that from science fiction? So I have a strong recommendation to read the following trilogy from a Chinese author, Liu Cixin. He wrote a trilogy. It's called Remembrance of Earth's Past. The first book is the most famous of them. It's called The Three Body Problem. How good is this book? Well, first off, it won the Hugo Award for science fiction writing. 2, it's currently being adapted into a Netflix series as we speak by the same people who did Game of Thrones. And 3, it's just really good hard fiction science writing. So there's a whole lot of back and forth between aliens and humans, and specifically aliens coming from Alpha Centauri and basically coming to Earth to conquer. Now, one of the things we actually learn in these books is these aliens coming to destroy us are not only just super technologically advanced, but they are nothing compared to what's really scary out in the galaxy. And
so again, that's like plays into what we were saying right at the beginning of this talk.
Yeah. And so the idea is here that somehow God's salvation plan will come in. Here's what happened. Now, spoilers. Now, I don't want to spoil too much. So at this point, what everyone who's watching should do is mute the video, donate $10 in super chats to this, while I very quickly give away some spoilers to the 3rd book in the series. Humans already know that they're doomed because another civilization is going to come in and basically blow up the sun. So they decide to build bases behind Jupiter, so that way when the sun explodes, they can survive in those bunkers. The aliens are actually worried about detects the humans, and they're like, okay, I guess we're going to have to send the bomb. And it's like, oh, wait, I just noticed they have gas supergiants so the bomb might not completely destroy them. So instead, they send another weapon that literally flattens the solar system into 2 dimensions, and everything is gone. And you hear the last harrowing radio screams from the last remainders of the humans in the solar system, and it just ends with the last sound going.
Well, that's a joyful story.
So that's the thing. I'm giving that as an example because you can unmute everyone. Obviously, you can hear me say unmute. But this is a case where, hey, does that sound like God's salvation plan working things out? No. And it's really clear from the title of that book. The last book in the trilogy is called Death's End, but that's actually not a literal translation from the Chinese. A more literal translation from the Chinese would be the God of death is immortal.
Right. So
yeah.
I've got a lot of time for seeing an enraged Dr. Adair there.
Yeah, but this is just an example of when these people say they don't know of a single example, and all I can say is just look at the books that have gotten the Hugo Award, and you'll know how false that is.
There you go. Sohan, again, Chips, and thank you again, Sohan. Well, he definitely won't be baptizing those aliens. So this is in reference to the film Signs, where the aliens were, their weakness was water. And of course. Yes. So it's like, here you go. Oh, no, you're dead. Oh, sorry about that. But there you go. Thank you, Sohan. That's really, really generous. Yet again, good man. So the final area of what we're going to talk about is the problem of evil and how the discovery of intelligent alien life, ETIs, will or might affect the problem of evil argument. What's the problem of evil argument? Why is there so much suffering in the world or in existence? Given that God is all loving, all powerful, and all knowing. He's all knowing and knows what to do about the suffering, but appears not to, or powerful enough to be able to do stuff about the suffering, but doesn't, is loving enough to want to do something about the suffering, but doesn't. So therefore, why all this suffering and evil? And the idea is that lots of defenses are given for this, but essentially no suffering can be gratuitous. So there can be no suffering that doesn't serve a purpose. But then you have to say, well, it's therefore necessary, because if it wasn't necessary to bring about some greater good, then that is itself gratuitous, and there could have been another way to get that greater good with less suffering. So there literally can be no gratuitous suffering. Every bit of suffering, from you stubbing your toe in the morning to 240,000 people dying in a tsunami, has to happen, is necessary, is the only way or the best way to achieve some greater good. And of course, this is problematic. The logical problem of evil tries to say that therefore this disproves God, but the theist comes back and says, well, there could be a reason that such a vast amount of suffering could exist. And then you have to say, well, okay, there could be a reason, I suppose. And then so you get the evidential problem of evil that says, well, okay, but what's the probability? There might be a reason, but really it's inference to the best explanation. What does all this suffering better support? Like an all-loving God existing, or atheism? And, you know, a fawn dying in a forest, unbeknownst to any human, better supports atheism than theism, the atheologian would say. Is that a fair description very quickly of problem of evil? Anything you want to add?
I think you're spot on.
Cool. Happy days. Well, that's good. So there's a paper the paper you've been referencing quite a bit, the Macintosh and McNabb paper reference, which is a paper by this chap called Ruhmkorff, that is the paper is called, let me just get it, The Copernican Principle, Intelligent Extraterrestrials and the Arguments from Evil. So this paper we mentioned a little bit earlier when we were talking about the Copernican Principle, which is, you know, we're going to be somewhere in the middle probably of all these intelligent life forms out there, or, you know, we could even be, you know, far down or whatever. There's very likely to be huge amounts of other intelligent life forms out there. Well, really what the Copernican Principle, as far as he elucidates it there, says is that given the amount of suffering on this earth, you can bet your bottom dollar there is vastly more, much worse suffering out there in the universe, given the principle of plenitude, given the principle of regularity, and all these kind of ideas. And this is called the Copernican principle, as he sets it out. So you can imagine the worst Holocaust in the world now. You know, we always go to like Second World War and the Holocaust, but that might be the tiny fraction of the amount of pain and suffering that you might see. You might see entire solar systems of genocide taking place. You know, think Star Wars, but times 10, right? And so he plays around with these ideas, and broadly the paper says probabilistically this really supports atheism over theism. Right. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. So the one thing about the Rumkoff paper that he tries to be at pains about is saying that if you assume that the structure of the argument from evil is sound, if you believe that actually it does add weight to atheism, then the existence of aliens should only increase that probability of atheism. So he tries to couch it in that if you think that there is some sort of solution even to the evidential problem of evil, then this may not apply, though he has a couple of responses. In particular, the responses out there that say evil has no evidence at all against the existence of God would basically allow literally infinite evil to not count as evidence against an all good God, which he just leaves it as says that just sounds absurd, and that seems to be a sufficient refutation.
Yeah, I think this is called the threshold principle or something. Like there literally is, and I talk about this actually in this book. I give an example, I think in there, of imagine you are being tortured for 50 years and seeing your entire family tortured in front of you, and the entire of humanity wiped out. And you are there being tortured for the last 50 years on your own somehow in some kind of like weird scenario. You don't know that God exists, but you're like, I believe in God, but this is all really, really terrible. But there could be a reason why this is happening. In other words, you can take the amount of suffering to the nth level and still say, well, there could be a reason. And it's just like, well, yeah, they could, but you know, really though? Yeah. Like probabilistically. And so it seems like the more and more pain and suffering you're adding on, like the less and less chance there is of God existing and all loving God existing.
Yeah, at the very least, if your morality of God seems to be inferior to your own personal morality, you probably do not have a solid theism, not something that should be defensible. If I am more moral than God, if I would make more moral decisions than God, either I need to change my ways to become more vicious, or this should count as at least some evidence against this sort of being.
I mean, I've done no genocides in my life, but God did a bunch, so really I need to catch up.
Yeah. He tells me I can't even get angry, but he can, wipe out all life on Earth.
I hope you've never picked up sticks on a Sabbath. All right, don't do it. So in the paper, the Rumkoff paper, he says the more instances of misery there are in a person's life, and the greater these miseries, the less plausible it is that there is a just so story that explains why that person had to experience exactly this degree of misery in order to have a maximally fulfilling life. Especially given that others did not have to experience such misery. And I think that's really interesting. So you like, and this is a real problem. So this is a problem of evil problem. You don't even need to think about aliens here. Like you can imagine like someone else has experienced abject misery for like 60 years of their life and then dies and like the most miserable existence. Mm-hmm. And you're thinking, why is it fair that they've gone through that and then I've lived an all right life? Okay, I've got MS, but my life has been all right. Or there might be, you might live an even greater life, or a priest who has access to God's love, and etc., etc. And you're like, why is this fair? Like, and so the only thing the theist can say generally is, well, it all gets evened up in heaven. It's like, no, that is compensation, not moral justification. This is something I often say, so sorry for those who have listened to all my videos or a bunch of them, because I do keep saying this, which is you cannot morally justify an action by presenting heaven to level the playing field. So for example, if I punched you full in the face and broke your jaw and then gave you $10,000 afterwards, my giving you $10,000 is a compensation for the hurt I've caused you for no reason, right? But it doesn't make my punching you in the face a good action. It compensates my bad action. It doesn't make it morally good. And the only way it could be morally good is if you believe in full-on consequentialism, which theists don't. Like the idea that the consequences of an action, i.e. me giving you 10,000 quid, is where you solely value the moral value. And of course, theists don't like that because you don't need God for that kind of morality. But you can't use heaven to morally justify. You can only use heaven to compensate. And therefore, you know, the idea that things are unfair for different people on earth is a problem that I don't think is solved by theism, which is God is unfair and there's loads of people have way more suffering than other people do. And that ain't fair. Sorry, I've been ranting.
No. In fact, I would also add on top of that, because we are specifically referring to the evidential argument from evil, the invocation of heaven actually doesn't help, because you then have to also lower the probabilities, because you need not just to consider evil, but now you have to add on top of another hypothesis that heaven exists and does all the things that one claims to do. And if we're talking about probabilities, well, the probability of there being evil and the probability that there is evil and heaven has to inherently be lower. That's just logically necessary the case. So if you invoke something to deal with evil that is itself not evidently true, well, guess what? You've actually lowered the probability of your thesis in the first place. Not to mention, on top of all of the other moral characteristics that you point out, that, yeah, compensation doesn't make up for hurting people in the first place. Yeah, so it's compounding that it's like, it's evidentially not the case. And two, it doesn't even make good moral sense as well on the sort of moral principles that most Christians would follow. So yeah, it fails to deal with evidential problems because it now brings in even more unevidenced things. And also on ethical grounds, it just seems absurd.
Thanks, old biker. I presume you're talking about heaven is not moral justification, it's compensation. I mean, that's something I feel really strongly about. And in fact, in the Ruhmkorff paper, which is like an atheistic paper, like he needs to understand that as well, because I read a whole section where he's talking about the afterlife and trying to deal with problems with the afterlife being presented as a kind of leveler. It's like, that's all you need to go in with. You know, you don't need to consider those problems nearly as much as you do. Sohan has another contribution. Thank you so much. I wonder if ETIs also have to pray towards Mecca. Of course, you know, given that there is no up, down, or sideways, I don't know, would it make any difference if you're a spinning like orb?
Fun anecdote for that. One of the first practicing Muslims to go up to the International Space Station actually had to discuss with imams about how he was going to pray because of two factors. One, how do you get the direction right? And two, how often do you pray? Because the International Space Station has an orbital period of like 90 minutes. So if you have, you know, if every orbit is a day, and then now you have to, like, you know, do your 5 sets of prayers multiple times in 24 hours, how do you do that? And I think they basically said, don't worry, God understands the situation. It's basically impossible to orient yourself just 5 times in the 24 hours.
That's so interesting because, like, if I was the imam, I would go, oh my goodness, it's just occurred to me that this might all be just a load of bullshit. Like, it turns out that you don't have to pray that many. Like, if there is no answer, and it's like, yeah, nice one. Thanks, Sohan. Really, yeah. Good excuse to get out that little nugget from the great Dr. Adair. And in fact, Sohan, he's not finished yet. So not too hard for people who believe that some guy's death pays for our sins to also believe that pie in the sky pays off death on the earth. Not too hard to believe in something if you really want to believe in it. And your job is to make that thing remain there and argue back from it. But is there anything you want to add?
Other than if there's pie in the sky, it's probably also served with Russell's teapot.
Very good, very good, good reference. He's quick today, is Dr. Adair. Good philosophical reference there. I like it. Thank you, Sohan. You are a legend. You're a great person for contributing so kindly. Thank you. The idea is that we are likely, as I said, suffering much less than many other areas of the universe, but also the idea that suffering is asymmetrical. So one of the arguments back against this is like, well, if there's vastly more amounts of suffering in the universe, then it's okay because there's vastly more amounts of good in the universe. So it just balances each other out, and you don't need to worry about it. But you know, he talks about that in the paper and presents arguments that he says that the argument from evil is asymmetrical, which means that evil is more, has a greater value, like the argument from suffering versus love and goodness is asymmetrical, and there is just, it appears, more sort of suffering. And if it is asymmetrical at all, even by the smallest amount, and you're multiplying that by trillions, then you've got a problem.
Yeah, and it is worth noting the attempt to try to circumvent the problem from the philosophical Christian paper that we are also analyzing. So besides, the general ways that one might try to get away from the evidential argument for evil, one of the things they try to say that they thought that wasn't properly considered by Ruhmkorff was that, well, if there are cases where there are much greater evils out in the universe, that also means, by the same principle, there's also greater goods. Therefore, it should balance out. And to me, that just fundamentally does not understand the argument from evil, because specifically, Ruhmkorff is trying to talk about gratuitous evil that has no reasonable compensation for why it would exist. The fawn burning to death, the people killed in the tsunami, where there is no equivalent good that can possibly be justified coming from that. It just seems like, no, this is clearly harmful with no actual greater good coming from it. And arguing that there is one is evidentially false. And here's the thing, that it might be the case that, yes, in those worlds that there also are these greater goods. But again, the fact that there are gratuitous evils already on Earth, it seems, if we go out and that's the case, that evils are happening there, that not only does this mean the number of places where gratuitous evils happen, so the total gratuitous evil would increase that way, but also there are even more gratuitous evils out in the world. Now, to just try to give as an example, earlier, like there was the example of talking about like heights. You might be the tallest person in your house, but on average, you're, average height around the world, basically. That should be your general expectation. So on theism, it'd be like, to use this analogy of like, you're the tallest person in your tribe, or you have some thought that in your tribe, you are the tallest you can possibly exist. You're 5'6", and you believe it is impossible to be taller than 5'6". And then you finally go out from that tribe, and then you discover that there are people that are 5'7", 5'8". Wow, this is already quite unexpected on your theory. If you then go to a basketball game and discover 7-foot people, that should be even more disconfirmation of your hypothesis. Not say, well, there's also short people, therefore my hypothesis is fine. It's like, no, your argument is that there should be no people beyond 5'6" at all. So finding 7-foot people or 8-foot people, like I think the tallest person in the world was like 7'10" or something like that. Waldorf, I forget the details about his life. He's from the early 20th century, but the tallest person in recorded history. If you're saying on your thesis that these people should never even exist, then their existence or probable existence should be harmful to your thesis, not say, well, there also exist very short people, and so on average, everything is fine. No, that you've completely misunderstood. If on theism, there should be no gratuitous evils, and on the existence of ETI, there are even worse gratuitous evils, that should be even harder to explain on theism, not compensated.
Yeah, and of course the conversation is, well, the theists would come back and say, well, they're not gratuitous; they are just, they're necessary. But then like, well, if there are vastly greater in like bigger genocides than the ones we've experienced, and like, well, why, why can we only have to explain a small genocide over here, and you have to explain again? It's the unfairness principle that I keep coming back to, which is like, why do they have it so much worse and why have we got it so much better? Like, well, why is the universe not fair? It's just more and greater, more and more examples of God's unfairness given his ultimate sovereignty.
And also, it's worth noting that if this unfairness exists as well, then it also is going to create more conflict. If we are better off than another civilization and they're so advanced, well, what are they going to do? They're going to come and take what they think they deserve. Well, guess what? Now we just doomed ourselves because of our unfair advantage.
Yeah.
More
and more problems. I mean, we could spend an awful lot of time debating that paper. I haven't read it as fully as I'd like to, the Ruhmkorff paper, but what it essentially argues is that the problem of evil and extraterrestrial intelligent life it adds much greater probability to the thesis that God does not exist, and so therefore it is a challenge to one of those 6 potential problems that we talked about in the Mackintosh and McNabb paper, whereas those authors, the Christian authors, disagree. And I thought there's another interesting idea that comes out of that paper, the Ruhmkorff paper, which is that suffering. So it is basically like the fawn in the forest fire. So you've got Rose fawn in the forest fire that exemplifies the problem of evil, natural evil, really well. So if this over a 3-day period, a fawn, a baby deer dies in a forest fire, then that's causally unconnected to humanity, and therefore causally unconnected to the fall of man and it being our fault. It just looks like it's just horrible suffering that doesn't need to exist. And now imagine an entire planet. Maybe you don't have full sentient life forms, but you've got life forms that can feel pain and suffering, goes through some kind of gradual heat death as it moves away from a dying star or something like that, not connected to any planet of intelligent life forms that are sentient. Imagine that. I mean, if a fawn can die in a forest fire, and we're pretty sure that happens, then this kind of planetary scenario is just as plausible. Yeah. Then that would present a real problem, because there's not that kind of suffering on a gargantuan scale. I mean, we can talk about given the potential infinitude of the universe, you can imagine very plausibly a gargantuan planet full of life forms going through immense amount of suffering over a prolonged period and then all dying. To what end?
Yeah, and it's worth noting that this isn't even necessarily that hypothetical. We don't know for sure yet, but that could have really be what was the history of the planet Mars. We know in its past it was a watery world, and we know water is the main precondition for life. So while we do not have proof,
we know it.
True. So it is at least plausible that life existed on Mars, and nowadays it's not even bacteria. At best, maybe there's some thing living under the surface, maybe, but whatever ecosystem Mars may have had in its past, it is now just destroyed. It is extinct, and whatever wonderful creatures may have ever been there are now clearly gone. So this hypothetical is unfortunately extremely plausible, even in our own cosmic backyard.
And you can imagine entire galaxies being sucked into a black hole, could you? I mean, is that a plausible scenario?
Not whole galaxies,
or whole
black holes don't
solar
work
systems.
that way.
Solar systems is what I actually meant. A whole solar system being sucked into a black hole. That's a plausible.
What more likely would happen is that some other massive body.
Don't hit me with facts. I'm just throwing out sorry, Karen.
But if some other massive body came through our solar system, something of a reasonable fraction of the mass of our sun came through, not even black hole massive, just a significant mass, it would so upset the orbit of our planets, we would probably get flung off into space permanently, and then we just freeze to death.
Yeah. So I mean, the idea is you can imagine a solar system teeming with life. and then that just being snuffed out. There are just unimaginably large potential instances of suffering that are going to be taking place, or are most probably taking place all around the universe.
Yeah.
And then
I think we also forgot the big problem.
Yeah.
The whole universe is gonna die.
Yeah. So this is going back to fine-tuning argument, really, which is the heat death of the universe. I mean, it depends but even if you believe in a big crunch or a cyclical universe, that's still going to happen. Just,
Yeah, that basically our future is that far enough into the future, even black holes will die. So if we are just extrapolating out the laws of physics as we know it, we see the universe expand, and then the stars die off, fewer and fewer stars replace it, and eventually the whole universe is black. And then even the black holes through Hawking radiation will give off radiation and slowly go away and die. And in like 10 to the 100th power years from now, time will end because nothing will change. The whole universe will be cold, dark, and black, and nothing. It's like nothing was even there in the first place. That is our future.
Keep it light.
Well, I mean, if we want to talk about the cosmic problem of evil, I don't know. How about a whole dead cosmos?
Do you know what? Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're talking about instances of maybe a solar system going kaput, or a planet here and a planet there. This is the eventual death and suffering of everything in existence.
Yeah, and it is worth noting that the attempts of Christian scientists, theologians to get around this problem is something I've also been reading up and trying to write up about. And in particular, John Polkinghorne, very famous physicist turned Anglican priest.
Yeah.
He died, 2 years ago, something like that. I forget how long. He lived a good long life, but he basically switched from being a particle physicist to being a full-time Anglican priest, writing books about the reconciliation between science and faith. And in one of his books, he tries dealing with this whole, hey, universe kind of, die. And basically his argument that, well, according to Revelation, that there will be a new heaven and a new earth that will replace everything, that there'll be this final judgment, and that this new uncorruptible form of the universe will come about. And here's the thing I realized about that. So much of what Polkinghorne and other scientific theologians try to do is reconcile science and religion and say, well, science shows that evolution is true, so this is the way God does things. And so our past is scientifically verified, and we just need to make religion conform to it. But science tells us what our future is and tells us it's bleak. And now they say, well, religion says that's wrong, so that can't be the case. So this inconsistency with reconciling science and faith, basically, insofar as the salvation message needs to survive, fuck the science. We need to make sure we don't die.
I was going to bring up this point about how what does this all say about the general resurrection, right? Going forward, if you're going to have some kind of, I don't know, whatever your understanding of that. And then this is where Christianity is odd, because how seriously do they take the Old Testament and Jewish understanding of, the Messianic age? If Jesus is the Messiah, then actually what's going on with the Messianic age? You can't cherry pick your way from the Old Testament and then really kind of ignore most of it and actually change your idea of what Messiah is. Basically, it's just completely dishonest use of the Tanakh. But I would then say, if as a theologian like Polkinghorne might say, well, okay, let's assume there's a heat death of the universe, but then it could be that this general resurrected Earth might just live on in some perpetual miracle. It's you stop doing science.
Well, that's the thing. He has to basically somehow argue, the Genesis story is all metaphor, but the Revelation story at the end has to be literal. There has to be some sort of general resurrection. Otherwise, what's the whole point of life and salvation? And that basically, it becomes this emotional response. The science has to be wrong at this point, because otherwise it's going to make me cry.
Oh dear! Don't get emotional. I mean, you've already just heralded the end of everything.
It's what I do. It's what I do. But I should also mention at the end of that novel series from Leo Sishin, the end of the book that's called Death's End. it basically shows that actually all of the civilizations in the universe basically decide to finally like do the ultimate sacrifice to allow the universe to be reborn, and so that life can emerge again. So while death might be eternal and we might even have to sacrifice ourselves to it, in that sacrifice, life becomes at least possible. So there is an interesting final twist to the story.
Just it warms the cockles of my existence to know that he wrote such a beautifully heartwarming tale of potentially life going on if we sacrifice all life to death. Brilliant.
Yeah, like I say, it's a strong recommendation that you read the entire trilogy, starting with the three-body problem. It's on Audible. Strong recommendation. If you regret it, then that's even more reason to donate even more to Jonathan so he can get better guests on here that won't give you bad science fiction recommendations.
There are no better guests, Aaron. Like, you know this, we know this. I mean, I've died and gone to heaven already. This is so anyway, as that's broadly what we have to say about alien life, intelligent alien life intersecting with religions. Obviously, we've hugely concentrated on Christianity here, but broadly speaking, well, actually, no, it doesn't apply to so many different theologies and different religions. You'd have to be able to pick apart all the different religions and what they believe about sort of moral existence, because what we're talking about is moral existences going on throughout the universe to vastly differing levels, far less, far more, like more suffering, less suffering, all this kind of stuff. How does that interact with, how does that work with whatever belief system you have? It's all about the morality, it seems. Or because we obviously aren't the pinnacle of creation. I think that much is statistically unlikely, verging on impossible. And it's not impossible, but I think that. But anyway, is there sorry, I'm starting to babble. Is there anything else you wanted to add to the conversation? If anyone has any super chats, please get them in. Any last minute sort of questions, get them in, because we'll still be here like babbling for a couple of minutes.
Yeah. It's also worth noting one last thing that science fiction does when it comes to the treatment of religion as well, when it comes to undoing our old superstitions and trying to put them in a scientific guise. So, various episodes of Star Trek or Doctor Who are going to show that, the gods of the past actually were aliens doing things in our past. And our future might be that we finally find the aliens and they become basically our gods of sorts. And in particular, what comes to mind is the original 1950s, The Day the Earth Stood Still. If you have not seen the movie, again, I can give a recommendation to the original 50s version, not the remake with Keanu Reeves. But basically, in that movie, flying saucer comes down in Washington, D.C. The person who comes out by the name of Klaatu, he comes bearing a message of humanity's larger place in the cosmos, but he is shot and killed. But his robot servant Gort will take him to be brought back to life so he can give his final message to humanity and say, you need to do good or this world will be destroyed by Gort. And it's basically Space Jesus, but with a better soundtrack.
There's a really interesting film on epistemology I watched called The Man Who Came from Earth. It's not maybe the wrong title. It's not the David Bowie film, because I told my mate to watch it and he watched that film, the David Bowie thing. Is written by one of the writers of Star Trek, who wrote this film about this guy who basically had a dinner party because he was going to move on, because it turns out he doesn't get older. And he was basically said that he was Jesus at the end of it. And he had been all these people and all this stuff. And you're trying to work out if he's just deluded or whether that's actually true. And it sort of plays around with your epistemology. Or epistemological framework, and it's really, really good film. I really liked it. It's basically like a play. Not a lot happens. They just go to a house and just chat for the whole film. But yeah, really good. Anyway, that you just reminded me of that sort of sci-fi, but not quite.
Yeah, there's actually even an episode of Star Trek where Kirk and company go to a planet. They find a person there, and they find out he's actually originally from Earth. He's 6,000 years old, and he was all these various people through history. He was Alexander the Great. He was Brahms. He was Leonardo da Vinci, and all these great, incredible people. But of course, immortal. A small difference from normal people, obviously. Other episodes of Star Trek where we meet the gods. We meet the god Apollo, literally.
I need to get into Star Trek.
This is from
this
is from the original series. I think season 2. The episode is called "Who Mourns for Adonis," and they literally meet after Apollo, and they understand how he gets his powers and things like that. In The Next Generation, there is an episode called "The Devil's Due," where this person goes to a planet, pretends to be that person's devil, and said, "I'm coming here to cash in on the contract I made with your civilization." But this person has a starship that's cloaked, and they're causing earthquakes on there using their various bits of technology to show I'm this really powerful creature. You better give me what I want. But she's basically just a con woman from another planet. So over and over and over again, if you want really to see what happens with religion and science fiction, please watch more. And when it comes to religion and science fiction, maybe the best series of all to watch is the reimagining of Battlestar Galactica. The original version is literally Mormonism in space, and the new version is basically polytheism and Mormonism in space. And it's written by Ronald Moore, the same person who did a lot of Star Trek and elsewhere. The ending is considered controversial, but I feel that the 4 seasons of Battlestar Galactica from the 2000s is monumentally wonderful science fiction, and also its interaction with the theology of the people in that world.
Good hint there. Take that on board, everybody. Sohan again, legend. But humans cannot go extinct per Christian eschatology. He will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead, goes the creed. Remember? Anything you have to say to that about the heat death of the universe?
One last bit of science fiction from H.P. Lovecraft in The Call of Cthulhu, one of the famous bits of poetry from that short story. That is not dead which can forever lie, and after strange aeons even death may die. Good. I was just looking at something else, and I was just trying to find something, so I missed that last bit. And that's really you just gave me this beautiful quote, and I was like, "Yeah, good." I didn't hear it. Like I say, it's one of the most famous bits of poetry from H.P. Lovecraft when he wasn't being the complete racist tool that he was, and being the best author that he could be.
Interesting. A confused or nuanced character, or something.
His racism was not nuanced. He was actually even worse than Nazis. He thought Hitler was full of good ideas.
Interesting. Yeah.
But he was also a skeptic. He wrote, he actually worked with Harry Houdini to write a paper taking down astrology. So kind of all over the place in that, sometimes, some ways scientifically and literally brilliant, humanitarily, at least in abstract, completely racist, but in person, a total gentleman. So, a person.
Robert M. Price is a big fan of him. But I don't know what that says. Anyway, so broadly speaking, where we've got to is that I think there are problems for theology, and I think there are problems for the Christian religion and the Jewish religion, I would argue as well. If there are alien life forms, intelligent alien life forms out there, there are intelligent alien life forms out there. And if there are going to be trillions of Jesuses. So just make sure you pray to the right one. No, it probably doesn't matter.
Yeah. And of course, when the aliens come and they tell us that, Jesus visited them and they gave them cake, what did we do?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, good. Yeah. Oh, there's so many rabbit holes I want to jump down with this idea of multiple trillions of Jesuses, and whether everything has to be the same because if it isn't the same, does it not have the same value? And if it has slightly less or more value, why aren't we doing it like them or them like us? So, when you talk about the blood of Christ and the body of Christ and some kind of Eucharist and all these kind of things, they surely have to be, you would assume, the optimal way, the most loving way, the most effective way of doing redemption. And if they're not, why not? And yeah, so I think it plays around loads of ideas to do with fairness. If things aren't done pretty much identically as they are here, or whatever. But anyway, thank you. Hopefully everyone's got something out of this. This is a completely different sort of conversation that you might have listened to normally. We've gone into some depth, I think, into areas you might not have considered at all. Hopefully we've done justice to the subject. If you like what we've done, please subscribe to the channel. Obviously, please like the video and do all these things that other YouTubers say that you should do. Press bells. I don't know. Do whatever you want, but it'd be nice if you support the channel in any way you can. That's fantastic, and thank you so much, particularly to Sohan, but Sabra and James and all the other, and VA and all the other great supporters in the super chats, and also in the very lively chat that's been going on. I think there's been like people arguing and disagreeing and things, which is fabulous. Thank you. Do you have anything to say, Aaron, to head us off into the sunset?
I am glad that we've gotten so much support. I hope everyone continues to support what Jonathan is doing, and no matter what, for everyone, live long and prosper.
Oh my God, it's happened. We've gone into super nerddom here.
Oh no, we haven't. I haven't started quoting Shakespeare in the original Klingon.
Oh, Jesus wept. In Klingon, Jesus wept. Don't even try and say that. Anyway, thanks everybody, but particularly thanks to Aaron. He's a great guy. I really appreciate that, mate. And stay tuned for other great interactions that we may have in the future and that may happen on this channel. I am hoping. I've had some email conversation. I'm hoping to get Dr. Francesca Stavrakopoulou at the end of the summer at some point. So that's really, really great. I'm looking forward to that if I can make that happen. So that's good. But yeah, other than that, I don't really have any news about what's going to happen going forward because I haven't sorted any other interviews out. But thank you so much, Aaron. You're a good man.
Thank you. And thank you for having me again.
And take care. Question everything, particularly yourselves. Toodle pips, everyone.